This morning's message is based on the story from the 9th chapter of the Gospel of John about the man who was born blind from birth. You may want to read that story first before you listen to the sermon. Rubins' Vase. There's a good chance you've seen it before. It's named after Danish psychologist Edgar Rubin, who first used the image in the year 1915 to ask a very simple question. What do you see? What do you see? A vase or something else? Can you see what else is there? Two people looking at each other face to face. It's very interesting that when shown this simple picture, most people immediately see only the vase. Others see the two faces first. Some recognize both. What a person sees typically depends on the image that they perceive to be at the front and center, Rubin said. But you can choose to see a different image simply by convincing your brain that the other image is in the foreground, while the central image is in the background. He called it the dynamic and malleable process by which the brain processes vision. What it boils down to is his word choice. You can choose to see what you want to see. It's something each and every one of us does all the time. We can be looking at the very same thing, but we might describe it in very different ways. I watch the Seattle Seahawks play a football game, and I marvel at what incredible athletes the players are, so gifted at what they're able to do. I get caught up in what a complex game of strategy and execution it is. My wife, on the other hand, watches the same game and sees a bunch of overgrown men in tight pants running around, playing a stupid game while getting paid way too much money for it. Rubins' Vase. What you choose to see when you look at something or someone truly matters. To learn to see things the way God sees them is one of the most essential and critical parts of living in this world as people of faith. We need to be careful not to get the vase and the face mixed up. The 9th chapter of John's Gospel recounts the story of a blind man. It's interesting how some people think blind people don't see anything. I wonder. It seems to me that this particular blind man had better sight than most everyone else in the story. I've often wondered what it would be like to be blind from birth like this man was, to have never been able to see anything from the very first day of my life. The Pacific Ocean, the Rocky Mountains, the Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, the Sonoran Desert, Chichen Itza. One of my favorite places, Canyon de Chelly in northeastern Arizona. What if I hadn't been able to see the birth of my children, especially that first one, when I took one look at her and immediately realized that she didn't look a bit like either me or her mother, but rather was a spitting image of her grandpa? What if I didn't have that memory? What if I'd never been able to see my mother or father or siblings? What if I had missed seeing Jill's eyes that day she looked into mine and said, "I take you to be my husband"? Or that time my son Ryan came home from school and wanted to show me the sign language that he learned in school. I didn't know any sign language, but I completely understood when he signed, "I love you." I think of all the things these eyes of mine have taken in over the years, both joyful and tragic, and I wonder, what if I had never seen any of those things? The man in John's Gospel had seen nothing his entire life, which meant that as an adult he had to live his life as a beggar because, after all, how else could a blind man make enough money to feed and care for himself in a time when blindness was considered to be the result of some horrible sin? In his time, there were no blind schools, no laser surgeries, no braille, no talking books, no special programs for occupational training. As a blind sinner, he had no value, no respect, no help. All he could do was beg for food and clothing, and that's exactly what he was doing the day he met Jesus. This particular day, he was sitting against one of the temple gates in Jerusalem. It was a festival day, which meant there were plenty of tourists in town. Fortunately for him, blind people always seemed to make a killing when tourists were in town. On their way to the temple, people would ritually plunk a coin or two on the beggar's spread open cloth. Not because they felt bad for him, but because they believed it was a way that they could earn a favor with God. Give the blind man a shekel or two and earn a few salvation points. Jewish laws did a great job of making people feel guilty, and there were a whole lot of guilty-feeling people in town that day. So this guy undoubtedly raked in a big pile of coins. And I'm sure it pleased him very much, but I'm also sure he would have given it all away if only he could have the gift of sight. Then Jesus came along, and what he did was nothing short of astounding. He scooped up a handful of dirt, spit on it, and made a kind of muddy paste that he put on the blind man's eyes. Now that might sound a little strange or even disgusting to you and me, but in those days spit was thought to have healing properties, and the spit of a holy man, well, that was thought to be especially powerful. Jesus spread the mud over the man's eyes and told him to go to a pool on the south side of Jerusalem. The man's friends walked him to the pool, and when the mud was washed off, the blind man could see. He could see. For the first time in his life, he could see. He could see what a house looked like, how a palm tree swayed in the wind, what the colors of the dirt and sky and water were, what the faces of his friends looked like. Those who knew him couldn't believe what their eyes were seeing. It didn't take long for the news to spread, and soon everybody in town wanted to know how it happened. "How is it you can see?" they said. "You've been blind since the day of your birth." Now, I have no doubt this man was overwhelmed with emotion and probably as mystified as anyone else. He just kept saying over and over again, I don't know. All I know is that once I was blind and now I can see." It was an amazing miracle, and he was at the very center of it. So were they all. Now, this is where Rubins' vase comes in. You would think that those who were there would see it for what it was. You'd think they'd come out in droves to celebrate what had just happened in this guy's life. Instead, every cynical, doubting Thomas in Palestine came out of the woodwork, refusing to believe that it really was a miracle. Instead of seeing the face, all they saw was the vase. "It's a hoax," they said. "This guy must be the twin brother of the blind man. He certainly can't be the same man who's been blind since birth." The Pharisees were the worst of all, the top of the religious food chain, the keepers and interpreters of religion to the masses. More than anyone, they should have fallen on their knees, giving thanks to God for this incredible miracle. And they should have encouraged everyone else to do the same, but instead they criticized it. It was the Sabbath. How could Jesus dare to heal on the Sabbath? It was against the law to even write a letter on the Sabbath, to untie something, to put out a fire, to bake for your family. And yet, here was Jesus healing on the Sabbath. Healing. That was work. You're not supposed to work at all on the Sabbath, not even to help someone. Even more, Jesus was helping a sinner. Even if it was a miracle, he was wasting it on someone who didn't deserve it in the least. I mean, come on, this guy was blind. Therefore, he must be a horrible sinner, right? Isn't that why he was blind in the first place? That was their thinking. They saw the vase, not the face. It seems to me the ones who were truly blind in this story were the disciples, the neighbors, and the Pharisees. It sure wasn't the man who couldn't physically see. It was all those who couldn't see what was right there in front of them, the true beauty of an incredible moment, the worth and dignity of each and every human being, disabilities or not, the amazing gift of sight and life and breath, the treasure and blessing of friends and loved ones, the intricate and awesome beauty of a world we are so fortunate to live in, the infinite variety that's so present in the people that surround us. So many times in life we stand in the midst of these things and we only see the vase. We don't see what's really there. We don't see the faces. We don't see or believe that God is with us, caring for us each and every moment of each and every day. We begrudge or diminish with our words the good things that happen to others. We choose to ignore the potential good in others for reasons we may not even understand. It's a kind of blindness that causes us to act with apathy and cynicism, like those in Jerusalem that day, instead of with amazement and awe at the true blessings of our lives. Remember the Old Testament story where David was chosen to be the new king of Israel? He was chosen over his 7 older, much brawnier brothers who seemed far more qualified to be king, but instead, David was chosen. And do you know what God said to Samuel when that choice was made? 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. "I don't look at the things people look at," God said. "People look at outward appearance, but I, the Lord, look at the heart." One of the greatest prayers we could ever pray is to ask God to give us the kind of vision that lets us see a person's real potential, the beauty of a sunset, the miracle of a birth, the promise of eternal life, the profound meaning behind someone's words, "I love you," the mystery and wonder of how God could do so much to love us and be with us. Rochelle was one of the oddest kids I've ever known. I don't think I've ever heard her say a dozen words the whole time she was growing up. Each and every Sunday when she came to church, she hid behind her dad. If you moved to the left or the right to try to say hello to her, she would move the opposite way, so she was always hidden. And she didn't just do this when she was little, she did it well into her teenage years. Shy would be a huge understatement for what Rochelle was. She was just odd. Nevertheless, I did my best to reach her, though she would never talk to me, never respond. I would move toward her when I saw one of her eyes peeking out from behind her dad. Somehow she always left a shoulder sticking out, so when she didn't respond, I would quickly give her a gentle punch on the shoulder and say, "That's from someone who loves you," and I would walk away. Sunday after Sunday, month after month, year after year, I did that. Punch. That's from someone who loves you. Over the years, I lost track of Rochelle. Never heard so much as a peep from either her or her family until a few years ago I got a phone call from her. It was very brief. Of course it was brief. It was Rochelle. It was amazing there were any words at all. "Pastor Steve, this is Rochelle. I'm graduating from Stanford, and I'm wondering if you would come to my graduation." Wow. What an invitation. I felt so honored, and of course I said an immediate yes. I flew down on a Friday night so I could be at her Saturday morning event. What she didn't say on the phone, and what I only found out by attending her ceremony, was that she wasn't just graduating from Stanford, she was graduating with a PhD in psychology. And she wasn't just graduating with a PhD, she was graduating with highest honors. And not only that, she was being recognized for writing and defending the best dissertation in her class, and not only that, she was receiving a special honor for writing the best dissertation in that department in the past 20 years. Little shy Rochelle, who I never even saw both eyes of at the same time. I was so proud of her and so ashamed of myself for the judgments I made about her earlier in her life and the assumptions I made about what her future might look like. She is now Dr. Rochelle Allen, and last I heard she was working as a PhD psychologist counseling the hardest of the hard criminals in the federal prison system in Georgia. She has dedicated her own life to seeing the faces, not the vases. Oh, and by the way, the last thing Rochelle said to me after her graduation before I got on a plane to come back here was this. She slugged me on the arm and she said, "That's from someone who loves you." Rochelle, Rubins' Vase, and the story of Jesus healing a blind man each challenges us to ask ourselves, when I look at someone, what do I see, the vase or the face? Do you see people and situations as you want to see them or as God wants you to see them? If those two aren't the same, pray for God to open your eyes.